Okay, and sorry, and like November.
Yeah.
All right, so big number N, we're gonna better know a president. President number 41, George Herbert Walker Bush. George H.W. Bush. Okay, so um, he's most famously, before he became president, he was Ronald Reagan's vice president. But this guy has like a serious resume. He was the director of the CIA. He was an ambassador. He was a congressman, right? He got rich by selling oil, right? Like he was a war hero back in World War II. So he's got quite the resume, quite the resume. So here's the thing about his historical ranking. His ranking is rising. When he left office in 1993, he was very unpopular. Like a lot of people didn't like him, but as it's turned out over time, a lot of the decisions he made turned out to be pretty good, and we now look back on him as having some pretty good judgment and pretty good stuff, even though we didn't like him in the moment. So if you were to ask me in like the year 2000 how we thought about him, we'd probably give him a D. But today we give him a B. Yeah. So he's been rising up quite a bit. Um, so he's dealing with the end of the Cold War, and we talked about that last period. But he's also dealing with the economics, right? We're in a long recession at this point, where the 1970s the economy was garbage all through the 1970s. Through the 1980s, the economy was slightly better, but not that much better, right? Through the 1990s, it's really bad. The economy is really bad the first like couple of years of the 90s. So he inherits a bad economy. Um, he's he is kind of famous for being boring in a lot of ways, right? That he's kind of just the pragmatic caretaker is his that's what he called himself, right? So he wasn't there to like transform the country. He wasn't there to like enact bold new policies or anything like that. He was there to just kind of take care of the country as much as
It was
possible.
like the baby.
Kind of, right? Kind of. Yeah, kind of. It's he basically wasn't there to like rock the boat. He wasn't there to do that. Okay, so let's get into some of the stuff he did, right? So let's deal with his economics. I told you that one of his economic problems is this. Um, he inherited a massive deficit, a $200 million deficit. Go ahead and make this a new number. Yeah. Well, let's see. Do we want this to be a new number? Nah, let's keep it in the same number because we don't really have a whole ton to say about it.
Okay.
Right. So basically, one of the big issues that he faced was that the economy was not going so great. He had inherited a big deficit. You can see right here, if you see on this graph here, right? So this red section here is Reagan and Bush, right? And so Bush inherits, this climbing like spending, right? And it's this period of spending where the government was spending more than it was taking in, but it was doing that because it had given tax cuts to wealthy people. Because it had given tax cuts to wealthy people and tax cuts to wealthy companies, and it didn't cut very many of the social programs. So, um, so Bush gets this where it's kind of a lull in the economy. Now, he presidents can't control the economy, right? If a president could control the economy, every president would choose to have a good economy, right? No one would choose a bad economy. It just wouldn't happen, right? And so one of the things you need to remember is that no president would choose a bad economy. They all would choose a good economy. So Bush is going to he is going to uh, attack this deficit by raising taxes. And he is going to get blasted in the news for this, right? During his election, he said the press had asked him, right? Are you going to raise the taxes? Are you going to raise the taxes? And he said, read my lips, no new taxes, right? And so they elected him, and then once he got into office, he raised the taxes. And he said, you know, this is what I need to do. I need to raise the taxes on some of these people because we need to pay for this stuff. And a lot of Americans, this is a time, it's Reagan's America, right? So Reagan has rebuilt the economy in a lot of ways. And so Americans are super, super freaked out about taxes. And they're super, super freaked out about this idea that you're going to raise taxes. And so Bush is he's the only president in the last 40 years to ever raise taxes. And he only barely raised taxes, just a little bit. And he didn't even raise taxes for most Americans, for just for the wealthy. And he still got blasted for it. All right, let's go to, okay, let's do big number O. Big number O. Let's do the disability rights movement. All right, so the disability rights movement, we're going to go back in time a little bit. Hey, Maddie's joining us.
Oh, she hasn't been here for a while.
No, she's been doing work online. I mean, she's been turning in assignments, but she just hasn't been doing it. Hey, Maddie, welcome back.
Hi, Maddie.
Hi, I haven't been here in a while.
I know, long time no see. We missed you.
I know, I
Okay.
lose track of time.
Yeah, so you're here just in time for us to start the disability rights movement. All right, so we're going to go back in time a little bit. This is big number O, disability rights movement. We're going to start this back in the 1970s, right? So we're talking about, Maddie, we're talking about Bush in the 1990s. And so we're going to give a little bit of backstory and then catch. So in the 1970s, this is the time when we have African rights, African American rights, we have women's rights, we have gay rights, we have Latino rights, Asian rights, right? We have all these different groups fighting for rights. The disabled are going to start fighting for their rights in 1970. And these are mostly wounded veterans. These are veterans coming home from the Vietnam War, and they're all jacked up. Like they lost limbs, they, got injured, they can't move around. A lot of the veterans, most famously, are in wheelchairs, and they can't do anything. They start a march in 1970, and the Vietnam veterans are saying basically, hey, we're supposed to be able to get medical care, but we can't even get into the hospital because there's stairs in the front of the hospital. These veterans used to have to wheel up to the front of the hospital and then wait for some nurses to come and pick them up and carry them in to the hospital. And the veterans are like, I fought for this country, I lost my legs for this country, and I can't even get in to see a doctor, right? This turns into a series of marches, and the United States passes something called the Rehabilitation Act in 1923. This is the world's first disability access law in the world. And basically it says that anything that's in the government has to be able to be accessed by everybody. So it's where they're going to first start to build some ramps and things. Okay, so the movement starts with veterans, and it starts with that, but it isn't only veterans, because as soon as the veterans start to march, other non-veteran people start to show up as well. Okay, one of the people who really, really stands out is this woman right here, Catherine McGee. I tried finding a picture from her of the 70s. I could not find one. So this is a picture of her in 1990. So you just understand that at this point in the story, she's younger, right? This is the same woman, it's just this is an older woman. Okay? All right, so Catherine McGee is just a regular old housewife. She's a regular old housewife. She's not disabled herself, but her daughter, Trisha, has Down syndrome. And here's Trisha, right? You guys know what Down syndrome is?
My aunt has Down syndrome. She lives with us.
Okay. What is Down syndrome?
It's with the 23rd or 21st chromosome, right?
Yeah, so I think it's the 21st, I think. I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure, but I
It's
think
it's one or the other of those.
right, and that chromosome is doubled,
Okay.
right? And it produces Down syndrome, right? And so people with Down syndrome will have, facial expressions that look very similar to this, and they'll have cognitive problems, and they'll have other developmental problems and stuff, right? Anyway, so Catherine McGee had her daughter, Tricia McGee, and Tricia McGee had Down syndrome. Now, at this point in history in the 1970s, it was normal for disabled people to not attend school, right? They just didn't attend school. So somebody like a Down syndrome person, like Tricia, wouldn't attend school, and the schools would say, well, what's the point of teaching her? She's never going to go to college. She's never going to be able to get a good job. She's never going to be able to do anything, right? She's always going to grow up and be a Down syndrome person. And so why bother?
Yeah, and the thing is that that's so far from like the truth.
Yeah, well, don't spoil the ending, Maddie, but yeah, you're absolutely right. Right. As it turns out,
Sorry.
as it turns out that disabled people like are capable of doing a lot of things and are like real people who want to have a real life, right? As it turns out. Yeah. So so Catherine McGee basically sues to get her daughter into the school. And the school finally takes her daughter in, but the standard practice for dealing with people like Down syndrome kids was to tie them up to a chair all day long.
Oh my.
So you'd bring the Down syndrome kid in, right? You would have a room where you'd have a whole bunch of these kids with disabilities and handicaps, and you would just tie them down onto the chair, and then you would just have like a worker come in and untie them and take them to the bathroom, right? And then bring them back and tie them back up, and untie the next one, take them to the bathroom and tie them back up, and and feed them like that. But they never actually taught them anything.
No, you're gonna have a lawsuit.
Well, this was normal at the time. This wasn't even a lawsuit. This was just normal, right? And they said, look, what are we going to teach these kids? We can't teach them anything. We're not going to teach them anything. And so they just said, look, we'll watch your kid for the day while you go to work, right? So McGee finds this out, and she thinks that this is a nightmare. And she thinks that her daughter deserves better than being tied to a chair all day, right? So she basically forms an organization of like mothers of Down syndrome children, right? And then a whole bunch of other family members, mothers and fathers of kids, they all start forming these groups and they start to lobby the government. They start to get this changed. By 1975, they passed this act, the Education for Handicapped Act, by 1975. And this act says that everyone has a right to be educated, even if they're handicapped, even if they have a disability. Everyone has the right to be educated, right? That's what this law says. And so this means it makes it so schools must accept all students. They are no longer allowed to turn people away for disability. And schools must provide actual teaching and curriculum for those students. So this is pretty cool, right? This is pretty cool. This is why schools have special ed departments today, right? This is why we have classes where we have students at Hillcrest who have some pretty severe disabilities, right? And many of the students at Hillcrest have, mental abilities of like a 4 or 5-year-old, like oftentimes, but yeah, but we still have classrooms. We still teach them. We have teachers. We, teach them as best we can teach them, right? And yeah, maybe we won't be able to teach them calculus, but we can sure teach them how to do some stuff, right? We
Yeah,
can
like,
teach them how to do
basic
something.
life things. I feel like
Yeah.
like I'm just barely learning about taxes in my math class, and I'm like, wow, I would have never found that out if I've never taken that class.
There you go. right? And with a lot of these classes, they focus not on like academic stuff, right? Like they're not going to learn a bunch of academic stuff. They'll learn some, but not a ton. But they'll learn how to read and how to write and how to, do stuff where they could get a job. They learn how to do stuff like ride the bus, and they learn how to like, dress themselves and shop and buy
Really
things.
basic self-management stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and the goal is to help them lead a life that is as independent as possible, right? All right, that's good. What's the bad news? I think you guys can anticipate some bad news coming
Uh,
after this law is passed. After these two laws are passed, everything's perfectly fine for disabled people. We solved the problem. No more problems.
Not every school is going to make a special ed thing because they didn't specify you need to teach these kids specially. They just said teach the kids no matter what,
oh,
and every single person's different.
yeah,
Okay.
that's-
All right. So you're tapping into something. You're tapping into a more specific example, but the bigger answer is that many schools or most schools don't actually adapt.
Yep.
Right?
Knew it.
So sometimes they just ignore the kids, right? Sometimes they say, all right, I'll take your Down syndrome kid and I'll just dump him into a regular class and be like, whoa, all the other kids are learning calculus. Why can't your kid? Is your kid just stupid? Right? Like that's not helpful. That isn't a good way to handle things, right? You need to have accommodations for people. Okay. All right. Let's define something here, and this is something that a lot of ableist people, have a problem with, right? What does the word accommodation mean in this context?
Well, you say accommodation, like uh, adapt. Like maybe sure they want to learn, but they don't have the same I don't know, like learning threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not able to really like what's the word, comprehend or understand like the same things that somebody who's like neurodivergent would.
Right, neurotypical, you mean? Yeah.
Neurotypical, yeah, not that one. Wrong word. Like
Right.
like maybe they have a hard time understanding like facial expressions or like what's it called, and figure of speech. So maybe they need like a special class that's typically set up for like them and their specialized like learning.
Yeah, you're thinking pretty specifically about autism. It sounds like you're talking about autism specifically,
Yeah,
Maddie.
or like maybe they don't understand why they need to shower. I don't know, something.
Sure, right. So an accommodation is going to be a change in the expectations to a change in the expectations to allow somebody with lesser natural abilities with reduced natural abilities to succeed.
Okay, yeah, that makes
Okay,
sense.
so it's a change in the expectations to allow somebody with reduced natural abilities to succeed. Okay, so this would be something like if I have a student who has dyslexia, right, and they can't read because their brain doesn't process letters, right, that I then allow them to take a test orally where I read the test to them and then they tell me the answer.
Oh yeah, like I'm in an IEP, so that means I have a seriously hard time focusing when there's a lot of people. So I just go into another classroom where it's more quiet.
Sure, right. And I have a lot of students who have different accommodations like that, right? Like they need extra time on a test or something like that. I have a student in my AP US class he's a very, very smart student, but he's autistic, right? He takes extra time, right? And so on the AP exam, I give him extra time when we take our tests in class and stuff, and he does well. He does a good job. Like he's smart. He knows the answers. It just takes him a while to process the answers. All right. Now let's define access in this context. What's the context of access? Right? Because this Rehabilitation Act is dealing with access. The veterans in a wheelchair don't have the ability to access the hospital.
Being
Right.
able to receive the same type of care, but in a different way. Like,
It is, so it's adjusting the environment to allow all body types to access to be able to use the service. It's adjusting the environment to allow all body types to use the service. Now, you guys have anticipated that a lot of these school things are not going to happen. And all through the 1980s, the next bullet point you have here is through the 1980s, most of these accommodations are happening very slowly. They're happening slowly and they're not all happening at once.
so like they're adding an addition every 5 years.
Something like that, right? Why are they going so slow?
Because they don't want to. It's
Well,
a lot of.
Some of it's I don't think it's because they don't want to. I think it's because of budgeting.
Oh yeah.
So I think there are two reasons. So let's put here in your notes, let's put reasons why accommodations are slow, are coming slow. Number one, let's put budgeting. Because Sam, you hit the nail right on the head, man. Like this stuff's expensive. Right? Think about a school. If we're going to have a whole bunch of special ed students who need accommodations, we basically need to hire an entirely new teaching staff for them.
Yeah.
Right? And we also need to hire new teaching staff for like ELL students who don't speak English, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we need to have staff for students who don't speak English, staff for students who need special accommodation. We need more staff for students who have even more severe disabilities, right? So you have to increase the number of staff. So a school the size of Hillcrest, probably 25 teachers are dealing with this population, right? 25 teachers are primarily dealing with this population. That's a lot of teachers. That's a lot of salaries. Plus you need classrooms for them all. You need books, you need curriculum, you need space, you need all that stuff, right? So one real problem is budgeting. That is one real problem. What's the other problem?
Well,
You're fighting cultural bias.
we
So
stigmatisms too.
Yeah, so there's a cultural stigma, right? It's a cultural stigma. It's a cultural bias that disabled people don't deserve to be accommodated,
Wow.
right? And this is like, you guys probably find this a pretty offensive idea, but it was a very common idea back there. You would just say, why would I bother teaching somebody like this because they're never going to be successful? Why would I bother teaching a Down syndrome kid? That Down syndrome kid's never going to be successful. He's always going to have Down syndrome. Right? Well, that's the bias that was in everybody's minds in the 70s. And so a lot of people were very resistant to it. Right? And then it also creates this weird mindset where you're saying, whoa, hold on. Why are we getting a special teacher for those kids? My kid didn't get a special teacher. Why is that kid getting a special ramp? Nobody built a ramp for me.
Oh my God, it's because they need it, not because it's a privilege thing.
Yeah. You're getting this mixed up idea, right? Of like,
it's kind of like,
yeah,
that kid with the wheelchair gets to use the elevator. Why can't I, with the perfectly functioning legs, get to use the elevator?
Exactly, right? And people start to look at it as, oh, that wheelchair kid has the advantage of using the elevator, right? They have the advantage of using the elevator, but I have to walk up the stairs, right?
Oh no, whatever shall I
When that's
do?
not in fact true at all, right? It's not in fact true at all. Though it's the fact is that the student in the wheelchair doesn't have the choice to walk up the stairs, right? They have to use the elevator the same way that you have to use the stairs, right?
It's like
neither have a choice.
Yeah, the choice. That's right.
Yeah. They don't have a choice, right? They don't have a choice, and neither do you. So that's the way it is, right? Okay, so by 1990, these disability groups have been fighting and fighting and fighting to get this done. And one of the big leaders of this movement is this woman right here, Judith Heumann. Judith Heumann, here in the bottom corner.
Wait.
Okay. She's
Wow.
one of the, say what?
1990s?
1990. Yeah.
Oh my lord. Wow.
Yeah.
So basically that was like almost 3 decades of fighting too.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, this was happened when I was in elementary school.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Um, yeah, it's not that long ago. Anyway, so Judith Heumann is leading a bunch of these lobbyist groups, right? And she's the one who's fighting Congress, and she's saying, hey, we need to get this passed. She's the person who champions what we call the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. Okay, and the ADA is passed in July of 1990, but it was not inevitable. This thing was not going to pass. A lot of senators and congressmen did not want to do it because they said that they weren't going to pass it because they said that it was going to cost too much money, and that, you know, why are we going to spend a whole bunch of money just so like a couple of wheelchair guys can get into the store, right? Like, why bother doing that when I could spend the money to help a whole bunch of other people do something else?
wow. Wait, but like so they were completely misunderstanding. It's not just one or two people with wheelchairs. Most of the population, like veterans and people who are born with disabilities.
Sure. Yeah, I know, right? And here's the other kicker, and this is one of the arguments that Human makes when she's making this argument to Congress. She says that over the course of your lifetime, about 20% of all Americans will become disabled, right? You're going to get old. And as you get old, you're going to have harder mobility issues, and you're going to have a cane, and you're going to have vision, and you're going to have cognitive problems, and you're going to have a wheelchair maybe, right?
Oh my gosh, so that's like, hey, I don't want to fight for this kid with a wheelchair, but in 20 years, I'm going to be in a wheelchair, so people need to accommodate me, but not so so
Well, that's the argument she makes.
yeah.
This actually gets so bad that in 1990 we have something called the Capitol Crawl, and the people in the wheelchair are out protesting, and they're saying, we're trying to talk to our government and we're trying to talk to our congressmen, but we can't even enter the Capitol because the Capitol has stairs and it doesn't have a ramp.
Yeah.
And they're like, we pay taxes, we're citizens, we should be able to um, address Congress, right? And so the Capitol Crawl is a bunch of people get out of their wheelchairs and crawl up the stairs using just their arms, pushing themselves up the stairs in front of the news. And the news is like, why are you doing this? And they're like, we're trying to exercise our constitutional right to talk to Congress just like any other citizen, but you don't have a ramp for us. This is such a big thing in the news that it passes the law.
Oh my gosh.
The result is, so let's put the result of the law here. The result of the law is that all public spaces in the United States must ensure access for everyone.
All public spaces.
All public spaces in the United States must ensure access for everybody. This means if you have a public, like a restaurant or a store, you have to have a ramp to get in, right? You have to have a way for a disabled person to open the door, right? You have to have a way for a blind person to use your store. You have to have a way for a deaf person to use your store, right? You have to have all of these accommodations. Okay. This is a super transformative law. This law is one of the most transformative laws in America. And one of the things that's tricky is that for the two of you, for anyone, I'm talking to all the students who are going to watch this recorded also, right? Most of you guys that I've ever met, you guys are physically fine. You can walk around, you can open doors, you can do whatever, right? Some of you have learning disabilities, right? And you get accommodations otherwise, right? But what you don't know is that because you're not in the wheelchair, because you're not dealing with these issues, you don't notice that the world around you has been changed. There's a really good assignment. I like the assignment a lot, and it's one of the assignments that you can opt to do, where you walk around the school and you take a selfie around the school with everything in the school that's ADA compliant, Americans with Disabilities. And you look at the manual, there's a big manual, a 100-page manual that the government has, right? And you go and take pictures with this, and then you put the pictures, and then you explain how it is. It's a really cool assignment, and my in-person classes did it already, and I would like to invite you guys to do it as well, if you can, because what it does is it kind of transforms your conception of the world around you, because you'll see that like everything around you has been changed. Think about Hillcrest High School. Have you ever seen a doorknob in Hillcrest High School? Like a doorknob.
No.
Like if you enter into my classroom, what does the doorknob look like?
It's a
A
lever.
latch. It's a latch, right? It's a latch. And that's because the Americans with Disabilities Act says you have to be able to open the door without hands for somebody who doesn't have hands, right? And so they can just push on the latch and the door will open, right? And that would be somebody who doesn't have a fully formed arm, or somebody who lost their arm, or somebody who has severe arthritis and they can't grip something, right? Like somebody, so they can just push on the doorknob and it'll open up, right? It's a weird thing that you've never really thought of, but doorknobs don't exist in public spaces anymore. That's why all doors are going to be like a push button, like a push thing, or like a curved piece of metal that you can pull on, or a latch of some kind, right? And those are all,
When you go
those
to
are,
or like the doctor, most of them have automatic doors now.
yeah. And that's because of the ADA. But there's a million things about that. There's a million things about the world around you that are all ADA compliant. And because you guys, it happened, 20, 30 years before you were born, right? And it happened however long before you were born, and the entire world had already been transformed. But try to attend Hillcrest High School in a wheelchair without a ramp, and without an elevator, and without an automatic button on the front door, and and without bathroom sinks that are a certain height, and drinking fountains that are a certain height, right? Like it would be impossible for you to use the school.
Oh yeah, it would.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good place for us to stop. You do not have to do the ADA assignment, but I invite you to do it. It's a cool assignment, and I like it a lot. It's one of my favorite assignments of the year. So I invite you to do it, but you, of course, can live your life and do what you want. Okay? All right.
Okay.